One thing to note though, it wasn't just blacks who were in danger. White Republicans, a lot of white Republicans got killed because they were called carpetbaggers. Basically, they weren't popular either. So white people were in danger too. Just bear that in mind.
Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today we are going to be having a conversation on Reconstruction and why it failed. From the little understanding that I have of US history, I think that after the Civil War, there were a series of policies that were put in place to address the injustices done to African Americans. And that era was largely called the Reconstruction era. If I remember correctly, there was the proposal to give each freedman family 40 acres and a mule. Right, but it seemed like along the way there were some hitches, and many of the policies were not followed through until much more later in US history. And some would even argue that that redress has still not been done. So today, I just want to explore this topic of Reconstruction. I want to try and find out from Stanley, who is an American who has vast knowledge about these sorts of things that has to do with African American history. So I want to understand what Reconstruction was and what its aims were, what were the objectives of Reconstruction, and if it was implemented, how it was implemented, what life was for Black Americans in the South after the Civil War, and how the Southern US society changed after the Civil War, or how it did not change. How did Reconstruction come to an end? Because people believed it came to an end, and people believe that it failed. Why did it fail? And can some of the aims of Reconstruction still be achieved today? Can anything from the Reconstruction era still be implemented today? And finally, what is the way forward? So to help me understand these points, we have Stanley here. So before we dive right into it, if you're just joining, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You can also support this channel on Patreon. You can check out my Substack. The links are in the description of this video, where we write interesting articles. You can also check out my crime fiction novel and my collection of poems. They're all on Amazon, and you also find the links in the description of this video. So Stanley, before we go right in, there are two things that have been on my mind that I wanted to discuss with you. Just 5 minutes, we'll talk based on those issues, and then we can move on to other things. The first is, why did Kamala Harris lose this election? So briefly, you're going to tell me. And the second one would be, why has there been sort of a bipartisan non-sympathy for the killing of the CEO? I want to understand what's going on in US society for to have that kind of response, not just from the left, but also from the right. So let's start with, why did you think Kamala Harris lost this election?
I think it was primarily two things. I think it was Joe Biden, basically that first debate he did with Trump, where he was visibly not well, not himself. And then I think ultimately it was immigration. They did not do a good job. That, in my opinion, they didn't take immigration very seriously. You may remember Greg Abbott, who is the current governor of Texas. He sent a load of immigrants to New York City. He basically, just as a publicity stunt, hey, I got a bunch of these people crossing my border. I'm going to make the liberals feel some pain. So he sent a busload of them up to New York City. And then shortly after that, DeSantis, governor of Florida, sent a load of immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. Both of them were publicity stunts. In my opinion, that's when the Democrats should have started taking immigration seriously. It's like, hey, these guys are doing stunts on us. We need to take action, and we need to take decisive action now. They kind of let immigration kind of overwhelm them. You got immigrants in Chicago, you got more immigrants to New York City, etc. And they just never got a handle on it. And at the time, this is looking back in hindsight. At the time, I just kind of figured, well, it is what it is. The next thing is the big shot that, oh, hell, Joe Biden has good days and bad days. All of a sudden, he's pressured to drop out, and you've got Kamala with 90 days to get ready for a presidential campaign. I didn't think it was a big deal. Again, this is hindsight, but not going through a primary. Basically, Kamala Harris kind of not going through the process of a primary and the Democratic convention. The right complained about, hey, she wasn't chosen via a democratic process. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. Turns out it was a big deal. So basically, immigration and Joe Biden not being well and it being kept from the American people. I think those were the two biggest things. And even though the Republicans have all three branches of government now, if you look at the popular vote, Trump only won by 1.5%. He did not run away with the popular vote. However, you can argue a mandate if you're a Republican or a MAGA Republican, because, hey, we got all three branches of government. Consequently, in a way, it's kind of thrilling to see that the Republicans control all three branches. Now they got to govern. Okay, they do not have Democrats except for the filibuster. They have no excuse to govern now. There's no Supreme Court that's against them. There's no Democratic president. Both houses of Congress, as of January 3rd or whenever Congress changes over, they have all three branches. They got to govern. There will be no excuses now. And as far as the CEO dude, I don't know what to think. Apparently, healthcare or insurance executives are not popular people. Why this guy, Killer's an Ivy League graduate, valedictorian of his high school class. He went to a real exclusive prep school in Baltimore. I think it's just a matter of, hey, he's a good-looking kid with a good pedigree, and girls love him, and Americans are just weird like that.
Yeah, but before his photographs was out there, the reaction was pretty spontaneous. It was instant. When things like this happen, there's usually going to be a lot of condemnation from either side or from both sides. But it seemed both sides from the jump, well, they had no sympathies. So
this guy was like under securities fraud investigation. He's the CEO of an insurance company. Not a popular job to have. And apparently he just was not sympathetic. He was an anti-hero, versus a hero. So that's the only thing I can say. You would think such a brazen I think one of the things that kind of shocked people is the way the murder was carried out. I mean, this is like broad daylight on a New York City street. Who does that? It was just an extraordinary event, an extraordinarily bad event, shocking event, but it was just the guy had brass.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that just impresses. We are going through a populist phase. When America goes through populist phases every now and again, where the everyman, Trump being our, he says he will be the people's retribution. I think we're just in a retribution kind of mood. And, some super rich guy who is under investigation for securities fraud. People get pissed off at their insurance companies because they don't cover a lot of things people think they should be covering. I think it was just a perfect storm. Perfect guy, perfect storm. The crime was brazen. The guy who committed it should be like a Brahmin with his elite background. He wasn't some kid from the hood. So perfect storm. Yeah. That's the best I can do to explain the reaction.
That's all right, Stanley. Thank you. Now that we've gotten those 2 points out of the way, let's dive right into why we're here today. So let's talk about Reconstruction. What was Reconstruction? Can you just give me a background? What did it entail before you will talk about what the objectives and aims of Reconstruction was?
Well, basically, Reconstruction was literally what it was. After the Civil War, Lincoln specifically and the Republican Congress wanted to basically, reintegrate the South. And the way they wanted to reintegrate it was to take the newly freed slaves and integrate them into society. Just so you know, Lincoln himself had explored plans to basically ship all the freedmen out, back to Africa, to Haiti. There were exploratory plans to say, hey, blacks and whites can't live together. Let's send them back, to their motherlands or somewhere else. It wasn't feasible. Black people did not want to go. Many of them would say they were born here, Frederick Douglass including. So essentially what it was, Reconstruction was a plan to integrate slaves into the country politically, socially, all the ways, basically make them full citizens. It was also, and this part is forgotten, it was also to integrate the common Southerner. Only about 1% or some really small number of elites in the South even held slaves. Most people didn't. And it was after the South was destroyed, you have to make sure that whites are soothed and brought back in to the country as well. So basically, it was a project to put everything back together again, but differently. It was build back better again, to use a phrase.
So in essence, it was like a twofold thing. One, to integrate the freed slaves into US society. The second point was to reintegrate the South itself, which had tried to secede during the Civil War, back into US society. So now,
but better in that the goal was to have blacks voting, 15th Amendment, basically 14th Amendment. Hey, that the Dred Scott decision basically said that blacks, even free blacks, were not citizens. They had no rights that we were bound to respect, mainly because we don't consider them citizens. So the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment was voting, black males. 14th Amendment was, hey, that's where birthright citizenship came from. Essentially, hey, if you were a slave and you were born in this country, you are a citizen. So that was the 14th Amendment. And then, essentially the 14th Amendment also made sure that all citizens were treated equally. And then the 13th Amendment, of course, was banning slavery except for people incarcerated or crimes.
So that to me was pretty progressive for its time. I mean, granting citizenship to everyone born in the US and granting equal rights. Now, I know that fell off along the way, but how were they, apart from passing certain laws and amendments, what were some of the specific things that were outlined to be done during construction for Black people? For example, the 40 acres and a mole thing. How was it supposed to be implemented? What were some of those things that were supposed to be done?
Well, I forget, it was General Order number 15 or something. When Sherman marched through Georgia, he wound up in Savannah, which is, by the way, where I am today. I'm visiting family. I'm from Savannah. But essentially, General Sherman, met with local, black leaders in Savannah. And he basically said, hey, what do y'all need? And, 40 acres and a mule was devised. And he issued a general order saying, hey, Black people, this is what we're going to do for you. And it wound up getting struck down by whoever the Secretary of War was. I want to say it was Stanton, but I don't think that's correct. The other thing that is interesting is not too far from Savannah, probably 50 miles away, Sea Islands of South Carolina. There was a whole scheme to take land that had either been abandoned by whites or confiscated, divvy it up into parcels of land, and basically have former slaves farm that land. And funny enough, it wound up being kind of railroaded in that land speculators from the north came down and basically took control of the land, even though the government was behind giving that land out. So essentially, it was realized that, hey, for Black people to succeed, they're going to have land. They're going to have some tangible assets in order to either feed themselves or produce crops that they can sell at market and make a living. So 40 acres and a mule, basically, that went away. It was struck down by whoever the Secretary of War was. I'll have to look it up right quick. And the scheme, and I can't even remember the name of the scheme over in South Carolina, basically, I don't know how to describe it. It was just kind of taken over by land speculators. And at some point, the people who, the original owners of that land, wound up saying, hey, it's our land, give it back to us. And essentially, property rights won out. These white people own the land, speculated, and bought land from the government. And the property, very few blacks were in a position to purchase the land outright. A lot of it was just rented or kind of like, here, farm this, and there's a scheme, maybe you can own it later. The whole thing just fell apart. The 40 acres and a mule and other types of programs were attempted, but it just didn't take. White people weren't having it.
So while I was trying to prepare for this, I just came across a couple of things. And one thing that really struck me was these are compromise of 1877,
Yeah.
where there was a stalemate. None of the two presidential candidates could get enough electoral college votes to clinch the presidency. And then there was a compromise which sort of saw the Republican candidate win, but with certain concessions, which was a setback for African Americans at that time, which essentially ended Reconstruction. So can you give a little bit more understanding of what happened in 1877?
Essentially what happened was Republicans and the Democrats basically were in a dead heat. And when they got together, because what happens in that case, Congress basically decides, the House of Representatives basically decides who the president's going to be. And the compromise was basically, was it Rutherford B. Hayes? Republicans, you can have the presidency, but the compromise is you remove all the federal troops from the South. Reconstruction, at the beginning of Reconstruction, basically up until 1877, the South was occupied by the U.S. Army. The Freedmen's Bureau, there were like local Freedmen's Bureau offices throughout the South. Blacks, when they went out and voted, if they were harassed, the U.S. Army was there to go, hey, you know what? We're going to protect these blacks, let them vote or face arrest or get all shot up or whatever, the consequences might be. So the South basically said, Republicans, if you want the presidency, the compromise is going to be unoccupied. Move your troops back out. We will be taking over, and basically we're going to run things the way we want it run.
And I think that did a lot of damage, because without federal troops there to protect the rights of Black people, it was almost like a revert to status quo, but without legalized slavery itself. And that led to some other things like, say, the Black Codes. And
well, one thing to note, though, it wasn't just Blacks who were in danger. White Republicans, a lot of white Republicans got killed because they were called carpetbaggers. Basically, they weren't popular either. So white people were in danger too. Just bear that in mind.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how this thing can transcend even race, quote unquote, and ethnicity. It's so surprising how the Republican Party of today is divorced from the Republican Party then. Like, it's totally unrecognizable. If they were the ones who were fighting for these sorts of rights, civil rights for Black people, for equality and all that, it seemed like it's the total opposite today. And I know we've talked about this before, how that happened, about the Southern strategy, the flip of both parties. But the change seemed like a 180. It seemed too stark. So do you want to comment on what was the strongest reason why that change happened with the flip of the parties?
Before we get too far, what's happening today is actually more complicated than just race. Immigration is wrapped up in it with things like H-1B visas. So immigration's a part of it. populism is a part of it. Essentially having Ramaswamy and Elon Musk running, say, this Department of Government Efficiency, you've got basically two, well, just call them oligarchs, basically deciding what stays, what gets cut in the government, etc. And to make a long story short, in my opinion, what MAGA is oligarchs like Ramaswamy, like Elon Musk, like Trump, riding the backs of the common man into power. Nominally, MAGA is a populist movement, but it's a populist movement being run by billionaires. So I want to basically say that it's America's, the funny thing is America is race crazy. However, there's class involved with the populism piece. There's immigration involved with the H-1B visas, basically people coming over from India and other places, taking very lucrative jobs. Some friends and I today talked about H-1B visas. I don't know if you're aware, but Ramaswamy's been in a little bit of hot water because he basically said that, hey, and Elon Musk as well, hey, Americans worship mediocrity, and this is why we need to keep H-1B visas. Basically, Americans are so, we worship mediocrity. Essentially, we're culturally lazy. We don't promote excellence. This is why we need H-1B visas, and we need to keep the programs in place. And it's pissed a lot of people in the MAGA movement off. So it thrills me, just a quick aside, to see, this is the danger of wanting to get a running start. These guys could wait till January 20th to start some of this stuff, because there's generally like a honeymoon when a new president gets in. People kind of give, a period of grace to new administrations. Well, they wanted to start, months early, and all of a sudden you've got all this political strife happening within the MAGA movement just because the billionaires are revealing their true colors to the voters. Elon Musk thinks that, the common American person is lazy, and their kids are miseducated. And we need to bring people over from India because culturally, these people are superior to American culture. And I don't know if you saw that. I don't know if you saw the tweet. I'm not. Well, yeah, it's a tweet actually. Let me see. I'll put this in the back chat for you. It made me laugh, frankly.
So so that we can quickly get back to the meat of the conversation, but just as an aside, today I made a post on Substack and I said that Elon Musk is on his way to being the first American he's on his way to be the first American emperor. I don't think it can't happen. This guy has sort of worked his way to the top of American society. He's not he's an immigrant himself, but he has worked his way up to that point. And it just seems it is every step of the way with his takeover of Tesla, of PayPal, of X, everything just seemed to be lining up for him. Yeah, I would say he's an idiot, but the way he's been able to get these things, it seems he actually knows what he's doing, but it's dangerous because it's kind of normalizing oligarchs. I know the US is being run by oligarchs, but right now it's out in the open. I mean, Elon Musk is basically doing what George Soros has been accused of by right wingers for a very long time. He's doing it overtly. He's not even hiding it. And it seems he's getting what he wants. He can just come out and tweet something, and then a bill that was supposed to pass just gets stopped. And you're looking at this now like, okay, what the hell is going on here?
People are going to get what they voted for. I mean, not a month ago, people were cheering Elon Musk being involved in the government. There's still a lot of people who think that America needs to be run like a corporation. And I usually tell those people that a country is not a corporation. You got a bunch of people who aren't employees of the government. And not only that, they get to vote for whoever is the head of that quote corporation. So These are people. These are people who voted for Elon Musk. I mean, right before Trump got elected, Elon Musk was giving away money. Like, if you sign this petition, you enter a raffle to win some money. So there was all kinds of things that made my eyebrows raise. So
Yeah. So,
they're going to get what they voted for.
of course, they would. Fred is saying he would want advice from a person that oversaw self-landing rockets. Well, would you? Is this science? Is the country a science project or something? It isn't. It's running a country. The competency that you use in running a business might not necessarily translate into what you use to running a country effectively. So,
A
is it
lot of
really?
people think that the skills are transferable, and some of them are. But the thing is that you can't fire U.S. citizens. You can fire on them, but you can't fire them.
Yeah. All right. So back to Reconstruction. Now that the northern troops were out of the south, and basically the southerners, the racist southerners, they had full control back of the south itself. What did they proceed to do next? Reconstruction effectively ended. What did they proceed to do next? And why didn't the north step in again when they saw all these things going on down south?
Well, part of it is same thing happens today. People get tired of wars. People get tired of having their sons killed. War is hell, not just for the people fighting it, especially for the people fighting it, but the families back home. It's and imagine this happening in your own country. So the reason the North didn't get involved is because, number one, it didn't affect them that much. It was kind of a problem happening far off. And frankly, they were just tired of spending the money and the material and the personnel on the Civil War. And what the South did is, once the Northern troops left, hey, you know what? We're going to start enacting black codes. Basically, it was the start of Jim Crow. Voting got restricted, land was confiscated, rules that basically mimicked slavery, in that if you were a black man, for instance, it's kind of, you were required to have a job. Like, if you didn't have a job, you could be arrested for vagrancy. And basically they took the prison system and turned it into a pseudo slavery sort of system, where they would lease out prisoners to all kinds of projects or companies, like mining companies, steel making companies, steel manufacturers could basically rent the people who were just kind of arrested for any old thing. They could rent them and make them work. So essentially, it was Jim Crow was essentially slavery, but the kicker was that during slavery, blacks were actually safer because they were property and people didn't want their property damaged. During Jim Crow, it's like, it's just another black guy, we can replace him. So basically what the South did is they wanted to make it as close to the way it was. And some of the laws, like the 14th Amendment, they were pretty open-ended. You could work around them. If you called somebody a criminal, they went to court and they were railroaded into jail. You got them. And for instance, say a sharecropper, I need some workers. Well, you put somebody in jail, they can't make bail money. Well, this farmer would come and go, hey, I'll spring for the bail money, but the consequence is now you belong to me. You're going to have to work off, the $75 or whatever I paid for your bail. And if you run away, the sheriff's going to bring you back. So essentially it was a system of pseudo slavery. Voting was out. You're not going to vote. Ku Klux Klan running amok. If blacks are successful and acquire property or whatever, yeah, we're going to take it or burn it or whatever. So it just got a lot more dangerous for blacks.
So this question has been burning at the back of my mind. Like, if Reconstruction had succeeded, what do you think Black America would be like today? What position do you think they'd be in? What are the things you would expect to have happened that didn't happen?
I don't tend to like to do counter alternative history because I don't know. if if you're saying Reconstruction would not change attitudes, I suspect for Reconstruction to
But
work,
I think it would have changed outcomes, even if it doesn't change attitude.
I think it would have changed some outcomes. I don't, I can't really say. Again, a lot of it, you can make people do things by law, but you can't change their attitudes. Winning hearts and minds, winning hearts and minds is much more difficult than just making people do things. You can make them serve you at the counter, but you can't stop them from spitting in your food or over salting it, that sort of thing. You can make them do stuff, but you can't make them like it. So I don't tend to like to go, what if Reconstruction had worked. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, because anything could have happened. So my next question would be, do you think that the civil rights movement of the 60s largely achieved what Reconstruction set out to initially achieve?
No, and as a matter of fact, it wasn't designed to.
So what's the difference between both Reconstruction and the civil rights movement?
Well,
What were they?
Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Act was basically reinforcing the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment. So the laws were there. The way the Constitution's written in a lot of cases is, here is the basics, okay, and then it allows you to pass legislation to enforce what the Constitution requires. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, there have been several Civil Rights Acts between, I think, 1866 and 1964, and none of them really took. So in my mind, at least, Reconstruction was basically occupation of the South. Troops were there to protect Black people and basically to keep civil order. The 1964 Civil Rights Acts and all the Civil Rights Acts were basically designed to put emphasis on what was already constitutional. It was kind of over and above what the Constitution called for. So Reconstruction wasn't designed to integrate schools or anything like that.
That's so. Given the position we're currently in, given the fact that Reconstruction ended, there was Jim Crow, there were the Black Codes and all that, and then the civil rights and all, and seeing where we are today, there's still some tension, some racial tension in America as regards someone addressed issues with African Americans. So, what do you think is the best path going forward for the US as a whole, and especially for Black people, at least in terms of healing some of the divide that is sort of widening currently? What can be done? What's the most productive way forward?
You know what? I'm going to be flippant here, but I actually mean it. And I see SKC's in the audience, so this will be for him. Basically, the best thing America can do is realize it's not post-racial. There's still problems out there. Knowing that there are problems means they'll be fixed. Don't ignore the obvious. So, I mean, it's really as simple as that. You're not going to win hearts and minds. We should basically be aware that we are not post-racial and act accordingly. It's just a general rule of thumb. I don't have specifics. I will say that it's a two-way street, though. I think that Black people need to realize that it's not 1944. Not much is holding you down. So basically, everybody needs to act accordingly. I think it's incumbent on blacks to know that we're not post-racial. However, to do a Shelby Steele, there's really nothing holding you back except what's between your ears.
Yeah. I think this last point that you just made is very essential, and it's a position that I hold. I mean, on Substack and on Twitter now, many people, when you see what I say, they'll be like, oh, this guy is a raging leftist. Years back, I was a raging right winger. But what you just described now is exactly my position, which is there are problems. Don't ignore it. This is for people on the right. Don't act like everything is all good. There are problems. Please don't ignore it. Then for people on the left, realize that, well, ultimately, there's really not much holding you back, even if there are problems. Don't make it seem like it's very dark, it's stark, there is nothing you can do. The whole system is against you, specifically against you because of your race and all. So that balance needs to be there. So I think it is essential for people to recognize that there are problems. However little those problems are, they still need to be addressed. And on the other hand, I think a lot of people who are hyperbolic about it's all stark and dark for black people, they need to change their outlook on such things.
Well, one thing I want to bring up though, and I've been on a soapbox, for the past few months, I think America's biggest problem is its parenting. A lot of things depend on the quality of the citizenry. And this is a problem that gets touched upon when people talk about marriage rates, single motherhood rates in the black community. Just a lot of things hinged on how people are formed, how kids are raised. And I think a lot of things stem from how we're raising kids today. And if you're raising kids to think they're victims, they're going to think they're victims. So just want to add that little piece in.
Yeah. Mr. Pelu, welcome. Fred is saying Charles and Stanley are politically shifted a little to the opposite
Is
me.
Pelu in there?
Yeah, yes. Fred. Yeah,
What's up,
so
Pelu?
I well, I didn't move entirely to the other side. I just broadened my horizon, and I just began to understand that the other side isn't entirely wrong, even if they're not entirely right.
Okay,
And
well,
I
I haven't shifted. I would say I communicate my ideas better.
yeah, I think that's it. I think I know this position that you just mentioned isn't new. I mean, we've discussed it before. And I think in one of the streams, you had said that racism today is kind of like speed bumps. There's
Mm-hmm.
always a way around it, which means
Mm-hmm.
that you believe that although it's a problem, you don't think it's that back-breaking kind of problem that you cannot overcome, right?
Right.
Some people think it's that kind of problem that you can't overcome. And that's where they get
There's
it wrong.
and those are the people that well, I mean, they're problematic. If the racists are problematic, the people who think racism is stopping you are just as problematic.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so maybe I'll just let people come in for 5-10 minutes. I think
Okay.
I can see some persons might want to come in and just give their thoughts on this conversation about Reconstruction, how you think it ended, and what you think it could have done for American society had it been successful. So, Mr. Pelu, Fred, SKC, guys can just jump right in if you want to. Let me just have a broader conversation with other people to pick their brains on this issue, right? Yeah, Fred said adjusting is a good thing. Yes, it is a good thing. Actually, uh, I like it better now that I'm adjusting. And that's why some of the things that the MAGA people are doing just infuriates me. They had a good thing, but I would say they ruined it. SKC, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Oh man, I'm doing okay. Recovering a little bit from a little bit of a cold. Sounds like I hope you're not getting sick, Stanley, because I hear you kind
No,
of
I'm
coughing a
I'm
little bit.
fine.
Yeah, man. But yeah, it's been a while since we've all kind of like
Gathered
long time
together.
since you all been on one show, man. It's it's how we all met. at your place,
Yeah,
Charles.
yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's good to
No,
have everyone back.
no, I think Stanley actually did a good job of the thoughts on Reconstruction. I mean, um, the vast majority of everything that was covered was accurate. The I agree with the thought about not trying to do the revisionist what if style of history. Typically, it opens up a lot of biases, and people want to either throw in more of the positives if they have a positive view of it, or if people have a negative view of it, they'll focus in on that and they'll tend to not try to give a more balanced opinion of what if. So it becomes a rat's nest of of craziness by doing that. But there was one point where you brought up the difference between Reconstruction and the 64 Civil Rights Act. And I think you were trying to say if there was like some similarities. But
No, I don't think. I mean, of course, there are going to be similarities, but Reconstruction was basically there to put the country back together and get it functioning again. 64 Civil Rights Bill was essentially, more or less an emphasis on, what was written in the Constitution. One was
yeah,
legislation, one was more action based.
yeah, and that's my agreement as well. The even the mindsets of the people at that time were they were in completely different places. In fact, it could be stated that the ones who were coming out of slavery, um, I would argue, were way more patriotic than black people in during the Civil Rights Act. Their viewpoint on a multitude of matters towards the country and towards moving forward as a people, I think were not only different, but in some when you isolate certain people, some of their views were diametrically opposed.
Well, you make a good point. I would actually say that coming out of Reconstruction, the people affected by it were kind of political innocents.
Mm-hmm.
There was the Republicans who don't want me to be a slave. There were the Democrats who, by and large, want me to be a slave. People in 1964, I hate to use the word, but they were more politically sophisticated, but they were also more jaded.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, and I don't put any major fault to them for this, but I think it was a large oversight of them, and a little bit of, I would say, political, um, hmm, maybe a little bit of political arrogance by not considering a lot of the thoughts that came out of the men of Reconstruction. I understand the jadedness of it, but there was a lot that they could have consumed from the minds of people like Douglas um, and Washington that they pretty much just, I wouldn't say outright discarded, but they didn't take heart to a lot of the lessons that those minds had put forth.
Well, let me ask you a question though, because I think I understand what you're saying and I don't disagree with it, but I would think when I say jaded in 1964, I think they were also out of patience.
Yeah,
Both Douglas and Booker T. Washington, especially, counseled patience. Do the basics. Make yourself useful, learn a trade, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder sometimes, speaking of counterfactuals, I wonder if Douglas would have actually gotten along with Booker T. Washington, when Booker T. Washington was at his prime. But I think you're right. They didn't take the counsel of patience that both a Douglas and a Booker T. Washington would have counseled. Wait a little longer. I think. Excuse me. I think they were just out of patience.
I agree. For better or worse, it happened. So, but
Yeah, I think at, at that time I could forgive them being out of patience because it had taken that long for certain promises to be fulfilled. I mean, giving basic rights to which was guaranteed by the Constitution, extending it to African Americans for it to have taken that long. I could understand why they would be out of patience and would want things to just run along faster. So yeah, I wouldn't have advised being much more patient as our 1964.
yeah, I mean, like I said, no, I don't think anyone can criticize them for a lack of patience. The I don't think that a lot of the more violent segments of those groups, I don't think that they helped as much as people thought that, or that a lot of people give gravitas to the more violently inclined groups. I don't think that they really accomplished as much as they thought that they did. In fact, in ways, I think that even in modern times, I think that certain segments of the Black community actually give more accolades to those more violently inclined men than is necessary.
Mm. So, would you like to point some of those? Were some of those groups who were violent, and what were some of the things that they did?
Oh,
That
like your Black Liberation Army people, the Black Panthers themselves. I mean, not going too deep into it, but I mean, um, I mean, they told you that a lot of their um, training enacted a famous little red book from the East. So eh, uh, throwing that in the midst of the end of a Cold War, and I just don't think that was smart business.
yeah, I get. Clinton, welcome to the show. How you doing? Please let's hear your thoughts.
To believe.
Good evening. Hey, Stanley, Charles, SKC. Good evening, panel. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah,
Mhm.
we can.
Yeah. So, my opinion is, I think that speaking on the reaction of the people at the time, when you speak of groups like the Panthers and later on Black Liberation Army, what we're seeing is a cause and effect of the time, right? So those groups are like premier groups that are well known. But you had other smaller groups, like you in the South, you had a group called the Deacons of Defense, uh, with a lot of atrocities that were going on in the South. We know the famous ones like the church bombings of the little girls. So you had people like the Deacons of Defense that said, you know what, we're peaceable, but we're gonna have to shoot back. So me personally, I wouldn't hold them. I wouldn't have too much judgment against them because at some point, it's just rudimentary. If someone hits you, you have to hit back. Even when you look at America with 2A rights and the whole Constitution, the reason why you have the rights to bear arms, they have a stipulation there. If the government, and Stanley could correct me, if the government becomes tyrannical, the citizens of the country have a right to defend themselves. Now, take that to what was happening to Black people during that era. You really can't judge them too harshly. Not everyone wants to march and protest, get hit with water hoses, watermelon, get dogs sick on them, and decide that they're just going to take it or they're going to pray to Jesus about it. Some people are going to take matters into their own hand. I think they have a right to defend themselves. And once things start happening, if you look at it, if you look at it like a war, in war, bad things happen. So you're going to have atrocities on both sides. But uh, personally, I think that they did the right thing. Those groups standing up for themselves. Now, as far as their methodology with communism and the Little Red Book and all that stuff, I'm not. I don't agree with that. But I think they had to do something. So again, you had a lot of different groups. Some groups you had a guy by the name of Fred Williams. Are you familiar with him, Stanley? That remember he went to China. He went. So we had people like again the '60s was just a boiling point of everything that happened from the time of Reconstruction and before up until that point. And I think the powers that be recognized that, and that's why they were able to make those concessions during that time.
Mm. Oh, right. So I think I get where Lead is coming from. I mean, if the if those groups have responded with violence, it's probably because they had tried other means or they have seen the peaceful means not get them anywhere. I mean, the peaceful means obviously will get somewhere, but maybe it was taking a little too long for that to happen. And besides, gun culture was a part of American culture. And trying to enforce your rights with guns is sort of a way a part of American culture. So what's probably that was them just expressing their Americanness. That's the way.
Well,
That's the way.
you also have to take in mind that there was a lot of violence done to the Black community. So a lot of it, was, in their mind, self-defense.
Yeah.
One of the things that the Panthers, emphasized was self-defense. So, that violence worked both ways.
Yeah. So
it actually was in their name, Stanley. I'm sorry to cut you off, Charles. Really quick. It actually was in their name. It wasn't just the Black Panthers. Their full name was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense.
Yep.
Yeah. So good. Anyway, I think this would be a good place to draw this conversation to a close because I didn't want it to go so long. We would resume having our live streams where we can just talk on end maybe on next week Friday we'll be doing all that. But I just
now that you're a successful and wealthy business owner, you don't have time for the likes of us.
Charles is grown, man.
Well, I miss my people, so I want to resume talking to you guys. So I would just like your final thoughts on the conversation that we had today. Let's start with Lead. We go to SKC, and to wrap it up with Stanley. Yeah.
I had a good time. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was a good topic. Hope to see more topics like this. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Lead. So if you like us to, if you have any suggestions on topics that you want us to cover, you can just drop a message. I'll go through them and then we'll talk about them. Organize a show to talk about them. Thanks, Lead. SKC.
Oh, nothing major, man. It's just glad to be able to catch up with you again and had these type of discussions. It was fun when we first all met years ago. So, man, you guys take care and bring in the new year with a good bang.
Thanks, SKC. Stanley.
Yeah, I had a good time as always. Good talk. So, and don't be a stranger if you ever get around to going over to the John Galt channel. Now, I warn you, it'll blister your ears. So,
I think my ears are. I think they are toughened So I can take anything.
See.
All right. Thank you so much,
All right.
Stanley. Thanks everyone for the show. Just to wrap off, at least I was able to get some more insight into Reconstruction and why it failed. And thanks for everyone who came to the show: Pasha, the Caprino lead, SKC, Pelu, and everyone who came to the show today. Thank you guys. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my books, my crime fiction novel, and my collection of poems on Amazon. You can check out my Substack. I'll put all those in the description of this video. And I'll catch you guys in another live stream. It's bye for now.